The full moon cast an eerie glow over the weathered headstone of James Gibson, freshly christened with damp earth by Christopher's calloused hands. A gravedigger by trade, Christopher found a morbid comfort in the quiet companionship of the departed. Tonight, however, a prickle of unease ran down his spine, a premonition colder than the autumn air. A fresh grave, untouched by his shovel, gaped open across the path. Curiosity tugged at him, stronger than his usual respect for the undisturbed. He peered in. The wooden coffin was askew, its lid shattered. A moan, raw and primal, echoed from within. Christopher fumbled for his lantern, its weak flame revealing a horrifying sight. A woman, impossibly pale with vacant eyes, clawed her way out of the broken coffin. Her tattered dress clung to decaying flesh, and a deathly stench filled the air. Elena Lucci, the young socialite who had succumbed to a mysterious illness a fortnight ago, stared at him with a hunger that chilled him to the bone. "Elena," he rasped, his voice catching in his throat. Elena tilted her head, a grotesque parody of a curious child. A low growl rumbled from her throat. Christopher, fear finally overriding his morbid curiosity, scrambled back. He tripped over a stray root, the lantern clattering to the ground, plunging the cemetery into darkness. Panic clawed at him. He could hear her ragged breaths getting closer, the stench assaulting his senses. Blindly, he stumbled towards the mausoleum, the only source of refuge. His hand grasped the heavy iron door, a desperate prayer escaping his lips. But the door creaked open with a horrifying ease. Elena's cold touch sent a jolt of terror through him. Her fingernails, long and black, dug into his arm. He screamed, a raw, primal sound swallowed by the night. He wrestled with her, the stench nauseating, but she was inhumanly strong. Her teeth sank into his shoulder, the pain searing. His vision blurred, the world turning into a macabre dance of shadows and screams. He felt himself being lifted, then slammed against the cold stone wall of the mausoleum. The world spun, then faded to black. The pale moonlight filtered through the stained glass window of the mausoleum, illuminating Elena. She stood over Christopher, her hunger sated for now. But the silence of the cemetery wouldn't last. Soon, there would be another scream, another soul joining the restless dead, thanks to Elena, the woman who refused to stay buried. The first rays of dawn found Father Thomas, the cemetery caretaker, hunched over a freshly disturbed grave. Christopher wasn't there. Unease gnawed at the priest. He knew the stories whispered about Elena Lucci, the socialite who'd met an untimely demise. Now, with Christopher missing, those whispers morphed into chilling pronouncements. Father Thomas wasn't known for his fear. He'd seen his fair share of sorrow and despair within the cemetery walls. But the sight of the overturned lantern and the claw marks on the mausoleum door sent shivers down his spine. He knelt and traced the marks, a prayer forming on his lips. Later that day, a search party found Christopher. Or rather, what remained of him. The attack was brutal, leaving no doubt about the culprit. Fear, thick and suffocating, settled over the town of Hollow Creek. Elena Lucci, the undead woman, became a terrifying legend whispered in hushed tones. Father Thomas, however, refused to succumb to fear. He spent his days researching ancient texts, his nights in prayer. He discovered a ritual, a desperate gamble, to bind the restless spirit back to its grave. It required a willing sacrifice, an object of great personal value. The following night, Father Thomas stood before Elena's desecrated grave, clutching a worn silver locket containing a picture of his deceased wife. The air crackled with an unseen energy as he chanted the ancient words. The ground trembled, and a spectral hand shot from the open grave. Elena clawed her way out, fury contorting her face. But before she could attack, the locket, held aloft by Father Thomas, pulsed with a soft light. It was a light of love and loss, a stark contrast to the darkness that clung to Elena. With a shriek that tore through the night, Elena recoiled. The light intensified, forcing her back into the grave. Father Thomas collapsed, drained but triumphant. He had bound Elena, but for how long? Only time would tell. News of Father Thomas's bravery spread like wildfire. Hope flickered in Hollow Creek. But as the townsfolk celebrated, Father Thomas knew their victory was fragile. The inscription on Elena's headstone now held a chilling new truth. Here lies Elena Lucci. May she stay buried this time. The weight of that inscription, and the knowledge that evil never truly sleeps, settled heavily upon him. He had won a battle, but the war he feared had just begun. Years passed. Hollow Creek, once gripped by fear, returned to a semblance of normalcy. Elena Lucci remained buried, the townsfolk finding solace in Father Thomas's bravery. But for the old priest, the memory of that night lingered. Every full moon, he would visit the cemetery, a bouquet of lilies in hand, a silent prayer on his lips. One particularly stormy night, as Father Thomas approached Elena's grave, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A single, blood-red rose lay beside the lilies, a stark contrast to the white blooms. Panic surged through him. Had he failed? As he reached for the rose, a voice, raspy but strangely familiar, echoed from the darkness. "Not yet, Father." He spun around, heart hammering against his ribs. There, bathed in the pale moonlight, stood a woman. Her face, though still pale, held a flicker of humanity. It was Elena, but different. The hunger was gone, replaced by a deep sadness. The locket, she rasped, extending a spectral hand. "It tethers me here, but incomplete." Father Thomas hesitated, then slowly placed the locket in her hand. A wave of energy washed over him, the spectral hold loosening. He watched, breath caught in his throat, as Elena's form solidified. "I am not the monster they believe," she whispered, tears tracing paths down her now rosy cheeks. "The illness, it twisted me. But the locket, your love, it tethered a part of me to the living." Understanding dawned on Father Thomas. Elena wasn't evil, but a victim, a soul trapped by a cruel twist of fate. He knelt beside her, offering a comforting hand. "There is still good in you, Elena," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Perhaps there is a way for you to find peace, not as a monster, but as a soul seeking redemption." Elena looked at him, a flicker of hope igniting in her vacant eyes. As the first rays of dawn peeked through the storm clouds, they stood together, two souls bound by a shared experience, ready to face the unknown, together. The legend of the undead woman might persist, but the truth, buried beneath the tombstone, would be their secret, a testament to the enduring power of love and forgiveness.